Okay, so first of all, news. There is a light coming. It's not here today, but we do have one coming, so that would be nice. So what this playlist is going to attempt to do, as I said in the last video, is I'm going to discuss some of the rule of law that's going to become exposed, and has been exposed a little bit by the self-ID crisis, is going to become further exposed by major institutional failures that we've got going on, like universal credit, local authorities, da-da-da-da-da. Now, before I start on actual describing this, like the rule of law that I'm concerned with, so I'm going to go over, I think there's 3 videos that I've got kind of in my head. The first one is about the wider legal context, so that's institutional, the law that shapes institutions, and human rights law, and then how that performs the function of like a legal bed. And then the second video will look specifically at laws that have evolved around safeguarding and around children, because that's one set of laws, and that's going to encompass, you're not going to know why, I don't suppose, until I get to the end, but that's going to even encompass things like housing law. And what that's going to do is it's going to explain the network of laws that have to exist for safeguarding to be offered by a local authority, because it's not actually a skill set that sits on its own. It's about the ability to bring together lots of different agencies and to uphold that rule of law. And then the next video after that will be looking at adults and vulnerable adults, because the questions about where the law starts and ends are very different for children and adults. So with children, you see an extremely clear example of power dynamics where we have to constantly recognise them because the law has agreed to intervene at this level. We do no such thing with adults. And so with adults, what we're going to look at is mental health legislation and capacity legislation and the law covering social care. And we're going to look at how they come together to both uphold the rights and freedoms of adults. Now, what social work as a function does is you are the person who is aware of the way that all this law links together. And what you are responsible for being is like, they call you the front line, and that's actually that's actually a very good way to think about it. Or somebody else, I saw a thesis that described us as street level bureaucrats. It's a very practical role. It's very much about observing and keeping an eye on upholding the rule of law while managing institutional pressures. So you are the one function in the political economy that looks at the question of the impact of institutional erosion on our ability to uphold the rule of law. And the reason you do that is because you're on the ground and you can see the consequences. And you can see when abusive things are happening, and you can see when pressure here is impacting here. And it has to be a human function. It's not something that you could have at elite level to do by proxy. It has to be a person on the ground. And then once you develop that ability, you never really undo it, because you can't, because that knowledge is always built through crisis. So because you're learning about actual crisis, and that comes back to the point of this playlist. Now, the rule of law that I'm discussing, I'm fairly sure that within 3 years, most people watching this video, even if they haven't watched this video, will be familiar with it. Because what we're going through is a process whereby institutional erosion is generating political crises around the rule of law to expose the rule of law. So one of the really good things about the self-ID crisis is it's a really good example, before I go through the rest of the playlist, to show you how that occurs. So nobody sat out at the beginning of the self-ID crisis and said, we need a situation where women have clarified the rule of law around safeguarding and the way that it upholds the female note and the way that parents are supreme, and we need a crisis which will expose what safeguarding is, how our systems are shaped by male violence, give you a demonstration of male pattern predatory behaviour so that you will have that. And yet here we are. That is precisely what's happened. And that's how these crises will work. They come out as political crisis, but the political crisis forces recognition of the systems. So I don't know whether that makes sense. What I'm going to say is a lot of this stuff is reflection that I have to do to function. So I might get a bit obtuse. If I get obtuse and you can't understand what I'm fucking saying, the problem is not you, the problem is definitely me. Write Park Life in the comments. I'll redo it. But that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through institutional law in the wider legal context, safeguarding law for children and laws around children, and laws around vulnerable adults. I'm going to very much look at the structure of the laws, and I'm going to explain how they're going to become exposed over the next kind of however long it takes. And this is happening at the time when the self-ID crisis is happening, when the trans rights issue is happening, where there is major institutional failure in local authorities, major institutional failure within other institutions, including, you know, the courts and universal credit. And what those crises will do is they are about institutional erosion, exposing this rule of law so that different aspects of this law can kind of be released from just being understood at local authority level, and so that they're now understood at a national level. So this crisis should take us to a point where the social care stuff that I'm discussing, the crisis around that should take that knowledge that I discussed there, and major crisis should put it at an elite level. The same will happen with safeguarding, and the self-ID crisis was part of it. And that's how I'm watching this crisis. This is the crisis that pushes that understanding of that rule of law to an elite level. And that's what this playlist is.